Access Minnesota, issues that matter to you. Access Minnesota brings you the newsmakers and the stories that shape our everyday lives, with analysis from University of Minnesota faculty experts. Now, here's Jim Dubois.
This is the Papac Museum of Broadcasting in St. Louis Park. It's home to one of the world's largest collections of historic radio and television equipment. And it's also the perfect backdrop for this month's edition of Access Minnesota, as we look back at the colorful and black and white history of Minnesota television. KSTP-TV was the first TV station on the air here in the Twin Cities, but others soon followed. WTCN-TV came on the air in 1949 and later changed its call letters to WCCO. More stations signed on in the 1950s and even as late as the early 1980s.
Now, from the action center of the Twin Cities, News 11 with Paul Majors.
Coming up later on in the show, we'll talk with Tom Osman, who operates a website, tcmedianow.com. It's a repository of historic clips of Twin Cities television. But first, we talk with Bud Kraehling, who has a storied 50-year career in Minnesota television, most of it at WCCO-TV, where he was one of Minneapolis-St. Paul's first TV weathermen.
As we wave goodbye to the chief executive, we say hello to our weatherman returned from the shores of Ely. How do you like your new home here?
I like the chair.
Comfortable?
Oh yeah, the table.
There just was no television school or no way of learning about television except to come out of radio. So I kind of assumed too that many radio stations also got into television. So they transferred their people, as WTCN did, from radio into television, as you mentioned, went on the air in 1949. So I think that was the schooling. The radio was the schooling that, and I talked to Dave Moore and John Gallus in those early days, and we hadn't any idea of where this business was going, but it just developed all by itself, and people just went to TV as soon as they could. And we felt like we were just kind of hanging on by the coattails of this business, going with it, and we learned as we went along, and I think we just were so lucky to have success in what we were doing.
It's a microphone, Senator. You talk into that end, your voice runs down the little wire into the camera. No, you can't see it. We just know it does.
Well, the early weather forecast was thought up by somebody at the station, and the sponsor was so important. Because we had a sponsor who wanted to do a weather program, we got a weather program, and it was on at 10 o'clock at night. No news around it or sports yet. In fact, the station didn't have a news department. We just kind of invented this weather thing. And I think the sponsor, which was Tasty Bread, must have had an influence of what they wanted to do. And people at the station decided how to do it. So I didn't have any input into that. But actually, a man by the name of Bob Franzen started the program. And he was to go on vacation, and I was asked to fill in while he was gone. So I thought, to myself, I don't know anything about the weather, but I've done a lot of commercials. I did the longest bread commercial, I think, that you've ever heard, and very little weather. The sponsor loved it, and I got to stay on. All the commercials were done live. It was a really simple commercial. The sponsor just didn't have any copy written, but they used the slogan, "It's baked while you sleep," and we used that. And I held a loaf of bread and squeezed it to show how soft it was. And we just kind of took off and invented things along the way. And eventually the Shell Weather Tower was developed. And there again, that came from the sponsor. The Shell had a big office here, a regional office. And the advertising man there thought up the idea of having Shell advertise on TV through the weather program. So they had built a little building actually that appeared to be at the top of a tower. We had a drawing of the tower and the building, and the camera would start at the bottom of the tower and move up a little bit and then zoom in a little bit on this building, and then they would dissolve into me in that same building in the studio. Had a roof on it and sides and everything like that. And all those ideas came from the advertising man at Shell about, I had a telephone, I was supposed to call somebody and had maps on the back, and the Shell account was handled by J. Walter Thompson in New York, but I never saw anybody from the advertising agency. But they sent me all these props to use. And one of the main ones was a actual head of an engine, a 4-cylinder engine. Might have been an old Ford, I don't know. And the idea was that the shell gas was so good it never caused any carbon to accumulate in the top of the head of the engine. So it'd stand there and show this head and turn it over, and it was all clean on the inside, and talk about how wonderful shell gas was. So everything was kind of told to me to do. I don't know that I really can think of anything that I invented, but you had to tie everything together. And I would think of having an opening for the news, and then I had to think of how I'm going to end it. And then in between it was a story about the weather, and there was a commercial in the story.
Live ads were an important part of early Twin Cities television.
He got a pair of skates for his hind feet. I suppose he's looking for a pair for his front teeth. Now, I can't see too good without my spyglass. It's kind of snowing in the distance there. There's Towser down there looking right in the front window of the skate exchange.
Now, Ralph Garvey Jr.'s bad habit is sticking out his tongue at his sister. Aha, it's a pretty bad habit, Ralph. And we've got that old dunderhead in our Cartoon Island courtroom where he's being accused right now of sticking out his tongue. Jury, would you agree with me that's a bad habit? Okay, Ralph. Well, that means that if you get rid of that bad habit, just like we did, we'll send you something nice. It's the newest game from Happy Hour called Shish Kebab. Don't eat it, but play with it and have a good time.
When Access Minnesota returns, we'll continue our look back at the history of Twin Cities television and have more conversation with longtime WCCO-TV weatherman Bud Kraehling.
Access Minnesota will return after these messages.